Mark, thank you. Well, joining us from Washington to discuss the significance of today's announcement is the former US Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Here in the studio is the former military intelligence officer, Frank Ledwidge, who served in the Balkans, Iraq and Afghanistan. His book, Losing Small Wars, is his account of why he thinks Britain has fared so badly. Mr. Volker, how do you imagine the Taliban will see this announcement?
I think they'll see it as a success for their strategy. I think that when we look at the bulk of the Afghan National Security Forces, they're very patriotic, they're fighting for their country, they're working together with us. But a small number of Taliban can infiltrate that and attack with green and blue attacks some international forces, and that causes a shift or a halt in the way we execute our strategy. So I think they will see this as something of a success.
Frank Ledwidge, how do you think they'll see it?
Yes, I agree. I think over the last few years what we've had is a rowing back from an extended involvement up to 30 years, General Richards said, and then it was to finish at the end of 2014, and now we're looking at even a moderation of that. And I think from the Taliban's perspective, they'll see that and they'll preach it, and it will seem a demonstration of continuing success on their part. That's the way they'll play it.
In other circumstances, you might have, if this is a perceived success or a reverse for Western strategy in Afghanistan, you might see that as shifting the timetable. Yep. But the timetable apparently is not going to shift. All the forces are going to be out by the end of 2014.
Well, let's see. Time will tell. I think what we can do today, and we can use today's or yesterday's announcement as an opportunity, as an occasion to say, you know what, it's time for the Afghans, as Mark said, to cut away on their own. Another 2 years alongside them is not going to make any strategic or operational difference, or at any major difference. And the difference for us, of course, of hanging on, continuing in combat over the next few years, 40, 50, 60 more families without sons.
Mr. Volker, what do you think is going to be the long-term impact of these attacks?
Well, I think the attacks themselves are not all that significant, as tragic as they are. That we've lost forces because of these Taliban attacks. We've lost them in other battles, too. The real issue is, what are we trying to achieve in Afghanistan? Are we trying just to get out? If so, then I think we're on that track anyway, and the Taliban attacks won't really affect that. That's where we're going. If the effort really is to try to bring about a stable state, to bring about some security, to give the Afghan people a chance to pursue their own development, and to make sure that extremist groups, such as the Taliban or those that they've given access to, don't get control of Afghanistan again, then I think we really need to take these attacks as a signal and say we really need to rethink the strategy. Transitioning in 2 years to Afghan leadership, I think, looks less and less convincing that this is going to be an effective way to ensure that we deliver the kind of Afghanistan that we've said that we seek to do. I think we really need to think about the deadline, we need to think about our commitment, and we need to renew our engagement with actually supporting the Afghans, the vast majority of which do want to build their own country.
So you're saying the deadline is inimical to the strategy, or successful completion of the strategy?
Absolutely. I think it signals to the Taliban that they know when we'll be gone, and it signals to the population in the middle that we won't be there, but the Taliban will.
Frank Ledwidge?
Yeah, I think it's very important we don't conflate Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Taliban are essentially a southern resistance movement. Al-Qaeda are an international terrorist movement. We can talk to the Taliban. Al-Qaeda is a very different thing. We beat Al-Qaeda, we finished Al-Qaeda off essentially, as Mr. Volker, I've no doubt knows, toward the front end of 2002. Since then, Al-Qaeda haven't barely been in Afghanistan. We must draw that distinction. As for any sort of viable state, somewhere between 95 and 100%, let's be frank, of southern Afghans regard their state, their government, as a bunch of thieves, robbers, rapists and war criminals.
There's an element of truth in some of those accusations.
There is indeed, Jeremy, an element of truth at the very least, yes.
So this raises the question then, given that both these countries and many others are committed to getting out Qam Kalermi as quickly as possible by the end of 2014, can they do so and leave a credible Afghan security structure in place?
Well, time will tell. The problem is our perspective is very different from that of very many senior Afghan officers, who fully realise that 3% of their force is of southern Pashtun origin, which is, of course, the heartland of the Taliban. How that plays out in future is unclear, but of one thing we can be sure: most of the Afghan army is as foreign to southern Pashtuns as the British army is.
Mr. Volker, how do you see it? I mean, is it possible that the Western countries are going to leave a credible security system in place in Afghanistan?
Well, it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. We're making the effort to train the Afghan security forces, to support governance, to push back on the Taliban. It's possible. But I think that it's a very risky strategy, and we need to think about, well, what if it doesn't work out that way? And I think it is quite credible to believe that an alternative scenario would have the Pashtuns, or the Taliban, taking control of the south, the Afghan security forces essentially controlling the north, one of the warlords in the west reestablishing control there. And then you have a question as to the Taliban try to retake the entire country, as they had done before, or does the Afghan National Security Forces try to fight back against them? And you may be seeing something of a civil war emerge a few years from now. Certainly no one wants that. And so I think we really need to think about the strategy we pursue today to try to make that scenario much less likely than it now may appear.
Thank you, gentlemen, both very much.